Good day and welcome. This is Rick Singleton. I'm the instructor and facilitator for the Certificate in Ministry in Supervision for Ministry that we're offering at Queen's College. Welcome to those of you who are viewing it as a recording. This is a shortened version of the actual class that we had on October 4th. Not intended to be a special recording, but I forgot to press the record button. So what it means is I will be giving you a little bit of synopsis of some of the discussion that was part of the session, as well as the content that I had prepared for it. And maybe to your advantage, it will be a bit shorter than the usual viewing. But don't get used to it. I won't forget to press my record button in the future. But anyway, welcome to you. Class is October 4th, 2017, and of course October 4th is Feast of St. Francis. So we start with the prayer of St. Francis, an appropriate one. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born again to eternal life. In today's class, we had Bishop John Watton visiting us. He was along at the college for a corporation meeting on October 3rd. And stayed as Bishop in residence for a bit of time with us and participated in this class, which was actually very helpful to us because Bishop John is the representative of the bishops of Canada, the Anglican bishops of Canada at ACPO. And ACPO, of course, is the Anglican Church's postulancy group, and they assist the individuals who are putting themselves forward to further discern their vocation to priesthood. The ACPO is put together of panels of people who are trained and suitably qualified to help people discern by interviews and by discussions of matters of great relevance to one's suitability for ministry as a priest in the Anglican Church of Canada. Part of the purpose of ACPO is that an individual who is ordained is then considered to have the competencies to serve in any diocese across Canada. Now, one of the interesting issues that came up in Bishop John's discussion, and it's very relevant to all of us, and in some ways relates to why we are offering this certificate program on supervision, is that for a variety of reasons, there's a bit of a shift in the church to people being ordained who have not gone through the typical and traditional seminary training program. Last winter, in February, I attended on behalf of Queen's College a session in Niagara Falls where bishops and other representatives of the diocese in Canada met with theological schools and others who were interested in the matter to discuss the future of training for priesthood in Canada. And one of the issues that comes up is, of course, the time is kind of past when you have a lot of younger people right out of university, we might say, who are coming into places like Queen's College or other seminaries and colleges, universities, to study theology and to prepare themselves for ordination. We now have a lot of people who are mid-career, late career, early retirement, and it's at this age and stage of life that they're further discerning their vocation, their call, and some are being identified as suitable for ordination, either as deacons or priests. And so in some parts of Canada, there's a bit of a movement towards having locally trained priests. So they set up programs that are not done through colleges and universities, in some cases a very slender training program, and then the person is ordained sometimes with a very specific mandate to do some ministries, and then they don't have the faculties to do other ministries. So those are kind of part of the larger dialogue in Canada. And but there continues to be an interest and a concern that there be kind of agreed upon standards, and there are, of course, in the Anglican Church of Canada, a document prepared by the Anglican Church of Canada on competencies for ministry. We'll be looking at that stuff later on in this program. But a bit of a concern emerging in some areas that while there's broad-based agreement that those competencies are important, and education and training are essential to achieving those competencies. At the same time, local circumstances are kind of prompting some bishops and dioceses to try and find other options and other means of achieving the competencies, or at least some of the competencies, so that their ministry can be provided in places that don't have clergy available to them now. And so it is a practical challenge, and one of the things that deserves much attention. Bishop John and I and others in the session had some discussion about the issues that we are about, more on the local level, where through our diploma program and associate program, individuals are doing some studies and courses on campus and quite often off campus using distributed learning models, and we see the need and benefit of having people who they have access to, clergy who can provide some supervision for their pastoral training as well as for spiritual direction. Bishop John also emphasized the importance and the priority of good spiritual preparation for people preparing for ministry. So it was a very good session. We enjoyed that discussion with him and are thankful that he attended with us. If we just move on, and I'll refresh for you that in our first session, if you haven't seen that, most likely you have either online or attended the class, you might remember that we developed a word wall of terms and concepts that we associate with supervision. And this is the one I started with, but if you were to see the one on the recording that we used last time, you would see that we filled in a lot of other words that came to mind for people as we think about and consider the concept of supervision. Word walls are great little strategies when you're with a group to get to draw out their thoughts and ideas and notions of matters that are related. And these days, there was a time you do it with flip charts and what have you, but now it works pretty good to do it on the screen using your PowerPoint. Last time we did some highlights, and so I'm picking the highlights, but we spent some time reminding ourselves of what the role of a supervisor is in a supervisor-supervisee relationship. And I'll mention that since we've launched into this program, a fair number of the participants have given me feedback that they feel that what we're doing here is very applicable not only to supervising trainees, but also to supervising others in pastoral ministries and pastoral roles and support staff as well within the church context. And so some of the examples that we'll use, and certainly, hopefully, the content of the course will be relevant for that as well. But supervisors are experts in the field, partners with the college, advisors on readiness, advise the college and bishops on people's readiness for ministry, particularly ordained ministry. Mentors and models on the culture, values, and attitudes, the core elements that go beyond the books and the classrooms. In other words, showing how to live the life. And that's important because supervisors help the student, the trainee, forge an identity. And as was mentioned in our last class, it's usually in an internship or a practical placement that most people who are preparing for a ministry role start to discover that now that I'm doing this and I've been identified as having this role in the congregation or in the community, that I'm noticing that people approach me a bit differently, and they call upon me, invite me, ask me, encourage me, or in some cases push me away because of their association and with who I am, or more so what I have become or am in the process of becoming. I emphasize again, and in a kind of a lighthearted way, we might say that supervisors and supervisees are not in the process of processing mini-me's. They're not to make, and don't intend to make, and of course the people that we recruit to be supervisors are ones that are identified by others and recognized for their competencies and their skills and their sensitivities, and so they're people who are not likely to want to and expect people to become just like themselves. But there are, along with that, some things that are expected to be different between the supervisor and supervisee. And so naturally there's going to be a difference in matters such as those on the screen: knowledge, skills, and experience, one's goals and interests, and theoretical orientations. And in some cases, some of one's religious personal beliefs, or personal religious beliefs, I might say, and theological worldviews. Supervisors, for people who are preparing for ministry, are carrying out an important role on behalf of the church in helping people to discern their vocation. This slide we used last week as well. These are only highlights, but they're matters that I felt are important to be reminding ourselves of. And this is from the Whiteheads, talking about a vocation here. A Christian vocation is a gradual revelation of me to myself by God. This God reveals us gradually to ourselves. In this vision, a vocation is not some external role visited upon us. It is our own religious identity. It is who we are trying to happen. And so the supervisor helps the supervisee not only acquire skills, become adjusted to a ministry role in a community, but more importantly, to discern what it is that God is calling them to. And does that include vocation to ordained ministry or some other leadership role in the church? I won't comment much on this one, but I will allow you to read it. But it is worth a ponder. now and later as well, bear it in mind. Jot it on a bit of paper for yourself. Many people mistake our work for our vocation. Mother Teresa says, our vocation is the love of Jesus. That's the source of our vocation. It's the lifeblood of our vocation, and it's the outcome of our vocation. It's the product of anything we will do. It is coming out of the love of Jesus. If that isn't there, the rest of it is only going through motions. I use this quote to remind all of us of, in life, as we're discerning and growing, we'll always find things that need adjustment and change. And trying to understand how we bring about change for ourselves and how we bring about change for others as leadership or supervisors take on that role, and people in ministry take on roles of teaching and preaching and guiding and coaching and counseling and what have you. And much of it is about helping people to make adjustments in life, adjustments from what we do as habit or what we do as simply following the culture or compliance with the world around us, or conformity, or whatever we would call it, adjusting to take on the life of Christ is an important piece of it. And William James, the late 19th, early 20th century philosopher and psychologist and physician, well qualified indeed, he kind of sorted out and gave a good description to how and why we do the things we do, where it comes from, and also that helps us to kind of look at where and how we might step into making changes. And his sentences on it were that you sow a thought, reap an action, sow an action, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. It kind of takes the mystery out of why we do the things we do or how we become the people we are. You know, the things we think about, regardless of where those thoughts come from, idleness or inspiration or prayer or reading or study or preaching or coaching or conversation. Our thoughts come from somewhere, and a thought can lead to an action, and an action repeated becomes a habit, and a habit in place becomes spontaneous action. If we become what we do, as we would say, it is our character. And from the character, we will figure out of ourselves and of others what our life will be like. It's our destiny. And that flow from thought to action to habit to character to destiny is true whether we're talking about the flow from bad, evil thoughts, thoughts that breed actions that are rooted in jealousy or resentment or anger or whatever the case might be, or thoughts that are coming out of compassion lead to compassionate actions. Loving thoughts lead to loving actions. Forgiving thoughts lead to forgiving actions. Merciful thoughts lead to merciful, and so on. So the flow from thought to action to habit to character to destiny is true whether we're looking at the positive or the negative flow. It's important here to recognize that as really a guide that supervisors, teachers, preachers, parents, anyone in a leadership role can have in figuring out how do I influence those that I am called to serve by supervising. Last time we had interesting article and good discussion on the article by Kenneth Poley, The Purpose and Function of Supervision in Ministry. I think many appreciated that and admitted on notes that I had from people that it's one of the areas that there's a substantial shortage for people in ministry, a substantial shortage of adequate supervision and up close supervision. In generalities, people keep an eye on what others are doing, but it's not always in a coaching and supportive type of supervision. Some would even call it suspicion or jealousy. Here on this slide, we have aspects of supervision in the context of ministry. So this kind of lays out kind of three main functions that supervision can have in the context of ministry. One is to support the minister in their vocation and practice and its development. And that is for a trainee minister or a fully fledged and designated person in ministry, to support the person in their vocation and practice and its ongoing growth. Second one is to safeguard the interests of those amongst whom ministry is practiced, including those of children and vulnerable adults. And so supervision can allow for a full, fully lived, fully activated mission and ministry. But supervision also protects against the faults and weaknesses that one might have by choice or circumstance, and the impact of those on others, and as it says, particularly children and vulnerable adults. And supervision can also help to ensure that ministry offered in the name of the church is collegially and accountably reflected upon in light of God's mission and the ministry of the church. In other words, it allows for the church to have some certainty that things that are done in the name of ministry in the church are truly reflective of the spirit of the church, the mission of the church. We can call it, as Mother Teresa does, the love of Jesus. We can call it the building of the kingdom, or use other terms to give a description. But supervision allows that it's done in that spirit. Now, another couple of things about supervision in ministry can have three pillars. There can be three things accomplished by it, and three purposes, we could almost say. Well, we've already said purposes, so this is more the effectiveness of supervision. And the benefit of it will be seen by how it impacts either normative, that is laying out for one who is especially in training, an understanding of how do I function? What are the norms? What guides me? What are the, we might say, the codes of conduct for a person who takes on a role as a deacon or a priest or a chaplain or a lay presider or lay reader? What are the things that are expected? What am I allowed to do? What should I do? Both in practical and moral conduct and witness within the context of Christian community and the broader community, as well as the legalities of what I can and can't do. So that's the normative part of it. It sets out what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you can do, and what you can't do. And it helps one to kind of take that, take on that identification of having the role, and reduces risks that might come with not knowing exactly what I'm allowed to do and not allowed to do. But supervision allows for more than just kind of laying out the law, we might say, and the rules and the policies and the regulations. It's also about forming a person, forming them in their appreciation for what it is we do, or at a deeper level, forming and helping the appreciation of why we do what we do, more so than just what we do. Formation of the person, or as was said on an early slide, forging that identity, or may I say, appreciating the identity in ministry. It helps with the exploration of creative approaches to demanding issues of ministry and relationships as they arise. And this I sometimes describe as the prophetic piece of it all. there are new challenges, new issues. It's the very reason why we're taking the steps that we're taking, for instance, at Queen's College, and having distance programs, and trying to build capacity for supervision in the broader community and more remote places and what have you, is because things are changing. And reading the signs of the times and figuring out how to respond, that's part of the prophetic role within the church. Just as those who are called into ministry and who will exercise ministry because they develop some competencies and are designated, delegated, ordained, or whatever the case might be, to take on roles in their faith communities, they too will need to continue to take formation and explore ways of being able to develop ministries to respond to the current needs. Another aspect of supervision, and I think it's a very core Christian aspect of it, and that is the restorative aspect. For those who've had challenges and problems, who are growing, who've identified matters or had them identified for them, to ensure the person that their vocation and their work is appreciated and that they're valued, and they're given the support that they need to be able to deal with matters to improve where weakness has been found. Right back to the prayer of St. Francis that we read in this day's feast day. And is to ensure that the health and well-being of the persons being supervised are appreciated and adequately addressed when and where there are problems. So those are the kind of four or three contexts in which supervision is carried out. I'm just going to flash up for you. I'm not going to take much time on these next few items, making a distinction between supervision and other roles, or supervision in ministry, I should say, and other roles where that have an overlap with supervision. The difference in line management here, you can read that and understand it as well as I can. Supervision and coaching, term that's often used these days to describe one's involvement with another in helping them prepare for something or to deal with problems or deficits that they've self-identified or been identified by others. Another one here, spiritual direction. Supervision and spiritual direction. I will take a comment on this one. And we certainly at Queen's College, I think most places would be the same, try to ensure that we don't get into having a supervisor for a person who they're providing spiritual direction for. Generally, we try to make sure the spiritual direction is reserved as a kind of an internal forum, as it might be called, or almost like seal of confession, as the term would be used, that things that are shared in that forum are so deep and personal that we wouldn't expect it to be part of any evaluations that we would do, or accountability or reporting structures that are in place. And we would always encourage that a person, we encourage all our students to have someone as a spiritual guide, a spiritual director, or whatever term they would use for it, someone that they go to on a regular basis to help them work through spiritual issues, not only in crisis, but for constant spiritual growth and nurturing. But we certainly would not assign a student to a supervisor, a field supervisor in our internships or practicums where we would know that the person, the supervisor is the person's spiritual direction. I'll give you a moment just to read that. And then, somewhat similar to it, the problem with if one had a supervisor who is their counselor. It's really, in some ways, about boundaries. And it limits both the accountability and reporting systems that will be in place for supervision as parts of formation programs, but also it would be an obstacle to the deeper benefit of counseling, like with spiritual direction. One of the areas that I want to take a little bit of time on, we didn't get into this last time at all, is the place of learning goals. And you can read through the bullet points on the screen as well as I can. You don't need me to read them for you. But the major points that I want to make at the start of it is that learning goals are in place to make sure that the person who is going into an internship or another field, any type of field placement, establishes what it is that they need to get out of this experience. At Queen's College, for instance, with our supervised parish internship program, typically in January, we distribute forms to the students who will be doing internships, and they apply for the internships. And part of that is to identify what they themselves see to be their needs. And then at our leadership team, we review those, and we also might identify things and further discuss them with the individual students that we think they need to work on as well in their field placement. And so then those are taken, and the student and the supervisor identify the specific goals that they are going to work on. And the format that we use, they not only identify the goals, but they lay out the specific things that they will do to try and achieve these goals, and also how they will evaluate whether or not they're making progress with it. Part of it being as well that when you identify goals, it protects the student from being going into an internship and just following around the their supervisor without really getting an opportunity to work on the things that they might actually need, such as if one wanted work with preaching, or if one wanted work with to have some experience in working with youth or developing Sunday school materials and delivering sessions and what have you, that those things would be identified in the goals and in the steps that will be put in place to accomplish the goals, and then how it will be evaluated. And of course, the goals are looked at regularly. In our context, we put in place the learning goals, the learning covenant, and then on top of that, we have an intern support team that's put in place for the interns. So both the supervisor and the intern support team are discussing these things all the time on weekly basis, or at least bi-weekly basis with the team, and weekly basis with the field supervisor, where they sit down and they look at the goals and see exactly what they're doing and how they're going, how they're getting through them. So that's part of that. Oh, I skipped ahead too fast there. Sorry about that. This one here also lays out some of the kinds of things that, just as the first one laid out generally, what how the goals are put in place and what their purpose are. I've had that up long enough to have a look at it while I was making my comments or rambling, you might be thinking. The second one is how the goals are accomplished. I'll give you practical illustrations there of the kinds of things that people would be involved in. As I said earlier, and I say it again, it's important that a person who's in a supervisee situation not just go about roaming around doing everything, but really so broad that they're not going deep with anything. And in many cases, just doing the same things over and over again, unless there's a learning covenant put in place that focuses on the specifics that they want to accomplish, along with other things that you would come across just by being in a parish or a community context. A few more things about learning goals. To help in assessing self-understanding, personal development. Constructive interpersonal relationships. Taking feedback, gaining more comprehensive view of the church, and so on. And securing a more functional knowledge of ministry issues, such as grief, divorce, suicides, and those types of things. You have here an interesting and helpful little cartoon video on empathy and sympathy. I'm going to flick it open and play it. It's only about 2.5 minutes, but it's very interesting.
My name is Sama. I've never
I'm going to skip past this ad that's on there now. But it is important, an important thing to know the difference between empathy and sympathy. And it's one of the things that we certainly encourage students and supervisors to kind of be aware of, and particularly for supervisors.
Very different than sympathy. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
As I started to say at the start of that video, which is put together an animation by Brene Brown, look her up, Google her. She has some great stuff on themes related to not only empathy, but vulnerability generally. And there's a great video called The Power of Vulnerability, and really worthwhile. Her stuff about shame and blame and the like, a really good resource. All done in ways that are very easy to use on sessions that you might be doing in congregations and what have you. I certainly encourage you to look her up. But what I was saying, why I used that short section on empathy and sympathy is just to remind supervisors of the need to be empathetic when working with a supervisee, and also to be able to monitor the supervisee's capacity to be empathetic rather than sympathetic when they're dealing with people in the congregations and in their placements. Empathy is essential, is a core competency in pastoral ministry. And many times people are not clear on how they're supposed to respond, and so the response is one of sympathy rather than empathy, and it takes practice to kind of to get into the empathy, to get into the feeling, to connecting with the person and allowing yourself to be kind of in their place, and imagine what it would be like to have lost a loved one, to be having that struggle in their marriage or whatever the case might be, and you don't take over their feelings, you don't pity their feelings, but you validate their feelings because you make the effort to kind of be with them and as I might say, to walk beside them. So the Brene Brown is her name. You can just take a notice of the spelling and just Google it, and lots of great resources available, especially her stuff in the TED Talks. So what I want to take a bit of time on now before I wrap up this session is on the conflict management. And managing conflict is an essential pastoral skill and leadership skill. And two of the major themes that I want to draw on today are ones related to giving feedback, both constructive feedback, that is primarily dealing with people at a time when there's something identified that you feel needs corrective input, as well as acknowledging times that things are going well and you would like that action or behavior to continue. So when it comes to giving constructive feedback, it's important that a supervisor be able to identify matters that need attention, and that they would be able and willing to effectively pass on the information when and as is needed. Most times people are a bit hesitant to give the constructive feedback, to effectively name what the problem is, and then to be able to make the suggestions or draw out the suggestions from the person themselves and get them to buy in to making necessary changes and find options that would help them to deal with the problem. Most times people do what's called the hint and hope method, which is rather than actually taking the matter head on and naming it and working through with the person what might be options to solve the problem and why it is a problem, what the impact of it is, they just hint at it and hope that things will get better. We see this quite often in contexts where there's an individual or group, a small group of a much larger group, and there's a problem with them, but rather than dealing with them, there's an email or a memo or an announcement or whatever the case might be that addresses everyone, as if everyone was causing the same problem or underperforming or whatever the case might be. And all that does, it seems to validate the people who are off track by making it seem as if, well, everyone is doing this. I'm not the only one who's showing up late or ignoring my duties or whatever the case might be. And the second thing is, of course, and the more damaging part is that it really is an offense to people who are not contributing to that problem or not underperforming, but yet they feel that they're being spoken to or treated as if they are. It's a big contributor to low morale in organizations when there's a problem and nobody's dealing with them. So we might ask, what are the advantages to giving effective constructive feedback? Well, the kinds of things that came up in our discussion the other day were that it helps improve performance. It helps the person see that if they're by choice or circumstance not doing what they ought to be doing, it gives them opportunity for improvement and correction. It helps them to recognize what they're doing really matters, to the point that if they're not doing it right or completing it properly, that it needs to be corrected because it impacts others, to the point that they're disadvantaged by it. The impacts of not handling or mishandling constructive feedback is, as I mentioned earlier, that it lets poor behavior, bad behavior be continued. It in some ways is seen by those, by observers, as almost rewarding bad behavior, shows weak leadership, and it deprives a person who needs some coaching or direction the opportunities for improvement. So let's see what's going on here now. I'm having a job too. So what I'm going to take a look at now are things that are laid out as basic principles for leadership. These are things that are considered to be principles. Those are give shape to the way that any person would, in a leadership role, would deal with other people. And the first one is, when there are issues or problems, to focus on the situation or the issue or the behavior, not on the person. So we deal with the issue or the problem or the behavior itself. We don't deal with the person as if they are the problem. Kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? And that brings a second thing, and that is, in a leadership role, one must try to maintain the self-confidence of others and the self-esteem of others, not to hurt people and make them feel like they're worthless or they're useless or incompetent and what have you, to allow them to feel good about what they do. You want to maintain constructive relationships. You don't do that by mishandling people, by offending them, or by ignoring them. Take initiative to make things better. There must be always a reason to make it better when we're dealing with things. And constant quality improvement is a term that's often used in organizations, and it's about making sure that whatever we're doing is still what needs to be done and is still addressing the current needs, and also glimpsing ahead to see what's on the horizon, what's coming up for us, how are things changing, and to lead by example. The gospel value in many ways. Make sure that we would do unto others as we would have them do unto us, and to look beyond the moment, not just kind of responding to things or reacting to things right now when we see it, but to look at, where is this going to go? What's going to happen if I don't deal with this? What's going to happen for me? What's going to happen for others? What's going to happen for the person who isn't performing properly? What's going to happen if I don't deal with it properly? If I'm tired or I'm fed up and I'm frustrated by it, or I've let things build up and now I'm going to, kind of blow off some steam. Think beyond the moment. So in this model, we look at basic principles, those that I just mentioned, and then we look at key actions. What do I do in particular situations to make sure that these principles are lived? So when we're looking at the key actions, as I just had them, I'm going to put up that slide again. Then we step forward and say, okay, how do I implement those key actions in a situation where I have to give constructive feedback? In other words, there's something that has to be dealt with that I don't like to deal with. I got to correct someone on their way of doing something. I got to draw to their attention that they are not doing things the way they need to be done. So these are the key actions that allow one to be effective as a leader in dealing with a problem with an individual. First thing is to state the constructive purpose of the feedback. You say, Rick, I want to chat to you about how you do this, that, or the other thing. How you talk too fast when you're reading, or you read too fast, I guess you'd say, or whatever the case might be. Straightforward, stating what it is. I want to talk to you about that so that you can find a way to slow yourself down. You describe specifically what you observed. Rick, I noticed this morning when you were doing that reading at liturgy that you went really fast to the point that I know that people weren't able to hear what you were saying. They weren't able to grasp the points that were in that beautiful reading. And you describe your reactions. I just noticed numbering is repeated there. You describe your reactions. You say, when that happens, I feel a bit frustrated because I know that you can read much better than that. You have such a loud, clear voice. You wouldn't actually say that to this, Rick, but there are people that you would say it to or something to that effect. And so my reaction is that I get a bit frustrated when I can't hear it. And I also feel a bit bad that I know that you could do such a better job on it if you could slow yourself down. And you give the other person an opportunity to respond. So you say to Rick or whomever, you say, do you find that you read fast when you're reading at the lectern or reading in church or speaking in public? What do you think of that? So it gives the person an opportunity to respond, and then you move on from there. You offer suggestions. Say maybe you practice it, or you might say something such as, I find that if I'm a bit anxious about something that I have to read or something to say or something I'm not familiar with, I read it over a few times. I even read it over out loud. Sometimes I look at it, stand in front of a mirror and read it. I time myself to make sure. I count between sentences. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 when I finish one sentence before I start the next, or whatever the case might be. So you'd offer some specific suggestions, and you'd summarize and express your support. At the tail end of it, you say, okay, so that's good, Rick. I really appreciate your approach to this, and I think the suggestions that you made, as well as the ones I made, are really helpful. I like your suggestion that you think you're going to read it aloud for me or for someone else before you actually read it in the church. That'll help you to pace yourself. And it is a good idea to ask Mary, who's always there sitting in the second pew, to put up her fingers for you if she sees that you're going too fast. Something like that. So it's just kind of a simple. Now, there's a couple of rules of thumb that go with giving constructive feedback. One is that if you can't think of a constructive purpose for giving feedback, don't give it. And it's almost a no-brainer in some ways because, if there isn't constructive purpose for doing it, it's not constructive feedback, is it? What is it then? It's criticism. And that's not a good thing to do to a person's face or behind her back. And that's not news to you. So if you can't think of constructive purpose for giving the feedback, don't give it at all. And rule number 2 is it shouldn't take any longer than 60 seconds to get to key action 4. So it's not about sitting down and having a big, long ramble with somebody about what they're doing wrong and all that kind of stuff. Because what happens if you do that is that as soon as I say to you, you say to me, Rick, I want to talk to you about how fast you speak or what time you arrive here, or whatever the case might be. As soon as I say that, the person, my ears are open to what it is that you're going to be saying to me. But it doesn't take very long once you've identified it that I start to get on the defensive. I'm starting to put together in my own mind, okay, why is this person saying this to me? And if I go on then very long, while I'm saying, or if the person goes on very long in addressing the problem, the person who's receiving the feedback is started to drift off, coming up with rationale and justification, defense for themselves, and so they actually don't stay engaged very long. So the idea is you try and get to it right away. So you state the constructive purpose of the feedback. You move right into describing specifically what you observe, because that protects you from doing the dirty work for others or being the mouthpiece for others, what have you. Describe specifically what you have observed, not hearsay, not gossip and what have you. Describe your reactions to it, and then in less than a minute you're up to the point of saying, so what do you think of that? Did you ever notice that about yourself? You might say, do you think I'm right there? Correct me if you think I'm wrong, or if you got your thoughts or ideas. More importantly, so now what can we do about it? What do you think is the best thing for us to do with this? And notice, what's the best thing for us to do about it? You want the person to pitch in, not just to take your suggestions. You want them to contribute their own suggestions, but you also are not passing them back to them as something, okay, you go and, we're never going to talk about this. Oh, no, this is ours together now. And so you offer the suggestions. You summarize at the end of it with a thank you as well, and express your support. So not overly complicated, but very effective in giving constructive feedback. Take a little bit of time to think about it. I distributed, by the way, you have it by email, material that I use in the parish leadership and administration course, both on constructive feedback and giving positive recognition. So you can read those materials. So when it comes to giving positive recognition, showing appreciation might be a way of saying it. Positive recognition is one of the most powerful motivators that managers and supervisors have, and it costs virtually nothing to use except for a little honest attention to people. One of the best motivators there is. When people are told they're doing a good job, you know what they'll do? They'll do a better job. It has a great impact on the individual, on their morale, and on their performance. People actually do better. They work harder, they work longer, they produce more, whatever, when they're given recognition. Simply affirmation, not raises. Raises probably have a good impact as well, but simply just the word of support. Has an impact on the organization. When individuals and groups of people respond positively, when they have higher morale, when they do better work, naturally the organization is better off for it as well. We always seek out a bit of discussion when we're doing those types of things. Good supervisors respond with recognition when things are going well. Effective frontline leaders use recognition as a tool to achieve personal and organizational excellence. So we not only give pats on the back when there's a job well done, we also give pats on the back, we give encouragement, we give support, we give recognition, we look for the successes and the achievements of individuals all of the time, so that it draws out the best in people all of the time. Here's the old 80-20 graph, or cliche, we could say. That kind of illustrates where it is. About 80% of the population perform at what's described as consistent standard performance. They do what they're expected to do, and some go a bit above and some go well above the standard. Some go a bit below and some go well below the standard. Typically, 80-20 is that 80% of the people get 20% of the recognition because they're doing a good job, and 20% of the people are doing a poor job and they get 80% of your attention because you always got to be on their back. But the challenge and the benefit around giving performance recognition is that you can shift the high point there. You can bring a good batch of those who are giving consistent standard performance into above standard performance, and you can shift those who are substandard into a standard performance just by using positive recognition for the good things that people do. going hand in hand with that, with people that are not performing well, is giving constructive feedback. So how do you do it? Bearing in mind those basic principles that we talked about before, focusing on the issue and the behavior, not on the person, and taking initiative to make things better, and maintaining constructive relationships, and maintaining self-esteem, leading by example, thinking beyond the moment, taking initiative to make things better. Those basic principles. How do you do that when it comes to giving constructive feedback? Well, it's not hard to do. First thing is you describe results you are recognizing as specifically and immediately as possible. John, that was a really good homily you gave today. Rick, I really like the way you did that reading today. Right after the liturgy, you say, and you state why these results deserve your personal attention. It really means a lot to me when people hear the word proclaimed well. I love it when I'm sitting in the presidential chair and someone is doing the reading and I can see the people hearing the word and it's sinking in. I feel inspired when I'm hearing the word that way with the community. So these are results. And that's why you're giving personal attention to it and expressing your personal appreciation. And you close by reaffirming your recognition and continuing support. So those are the key actions for giving constructive feedback. So that's it for this session. Next time, on October 25th, we're going to have a session on spirituality, as well as wrapping up some of the stuff that I've been doing and getting set up for this session. Thanks for your attention today, and we'll see you in the next class or next recording. Bye-bye.